Invisible at work, what Hagar teaches the overlooked employee. She put her son under a bush and sat down a bow shot away because she couldn't watch him die. She'd been thrown out of the only home she knew with nothing but bread and a skin of water. At that moment, when every human system failed her, God did something that changed history. He opened her eyes to a well she hadn't seen. This is Hagar, and this is Elroy. If you've ever been overlooked, underpaid, or quietly fired by people who should have known better, this is the truth you need before you clock in tomorrow. The invisible ones. The modern workplace has a seeing problem. Gallup tracked workers across more than 140 countries and found only 20% truly engaged in 2025, which marks the lowest engagement level since the pandemic began. The price tag staggers because low engagement drains an estimated $10 trillion from the world economy every single year, and that's roughly 9% of global GDP. None of that touches the real cost. It's measured in the quiet despair of people who show up, work hard, and still feel like ghosts in their own offices. WorkHuman ran its own index and found that more than half of all workers feel only somewhat valued or not valued at all, which means the majority of the workforce runs on empty. Nearly 30% say they felt invisible at work, and another 27% say they've been flat out ignored by the very people who should be watching their backs. When people don't feel seen, they check out, they burn out, or they walk away entirely. The damage spreads fast. Picture the junior employee who arrives early, stays late, and covers for coworkers who vanish at 5 o'clock. She hits every target and never complains. When promotion season arrives, her manager slides an announcement across the table naming the new hire who started 6 months ago, while someone less qualified leapfrogged her straight into the promotion. Now she's learning that competence doesn't guarantee anyone will see you. Hagar's injustice. Hagar's story begins with injustice. She served as an Egyptian maidservant, property in a world that measured her worth by what she could produce. And when Sarai couldn't bear children, she gave Hagar to her husband Abram as a surrogate. Hagar didn't choose this. Sarai handed her over like furniture and told her to produce an heir for the family that owned her, with no say in who touched her body or what happened to her child. She became pregnant, and instead of protection, she received contempt. Hagar looked at Sarai with resentment too, because powerlessness doesn't erase pride. Sarai looked at her with hatred, because Hagar's body accomplished what Sarai's couldn't, and the mistress turned on the slave with a cruelty that only deepened. Sarai mistreated Hagar so brutally that Hagar ran away into the wilderness with no food, no plan, and no hope of returning home, because staying meant more abuse than she could survive. This is the inciting incident of the story. A woman used for her womb and then punished for her fertility flees into the desert because staying is worse than starving, and Hagar isn't a side character in Abraham's legacy. She's the first woman in Scripture to name God. At this point in the story, she has nothing left but the name she's about to discover. That name will outlast every empire that ever used her. The wilderness encounter. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring in the wilderness on the road to Shur, and he didn't ask why she was running. Instead, he asked where she had come from and where she was going. Hagar answered plainly and said she ran from her mistress Sarai because there was no excuse, no defense, and no plan left in her hands. There was nothing but the truth. The angel told her to return and submit to Sarai's authority. That command sounds harsh to modern ears, but it came with a promise that changed history. He promised she would bear a son and she should name him Ishmael, which means God hears, because the Lord heeded her affliction and would make her descendants too numerous to count. Hagar obeyed and went back to the woman who abused her. She didn't go back the same. She'd met the only person in that entire household who actually saw her, and she gave him a name that no one had ever spoken before. She called him El Roy, which means the God who sees me. The well where she sat took the name Bir Lahai Roy, the well of the living one who sees me. She returned to injustice carrying a promise. The only question left was whether that promise would hold when the injustice came again, as it always does for people the system prefers to forget. Quiet firing. The biblical story doesn't end with the well, because years later Sarah finally bore her own son, Isaac. She looked at Ishmael and decided he didn't belong, and demanded that Abraham cast Hagar and her boy out. Abraham's heart broke, but God told him to obey. Abraham handed Hagar bread and a skin of water and sent her into the desert where the heat and the silence waited for her. And it happened again. The modern workplace has a name for this. They call it quiet firing, and it happens when a company withholds feedback and support until the employee quits on their own, saving the company the paperwork of a real termination. The system doesn't fire you, it simply stops seeing you. Her story is common. Maya works as a 32-year-old investment banker in New York who started at her firm 8 years ago, and she watched colleagues leapfrog her through promotions while she stayed put. She told the BBC that she no longer expects promotion because the system taught her that her competence remains invisible no matter how many extra hours she clocks. This isn't a glitch, it's the system working exactly as designed. Lauren Rivera at Northwestern's Kellogg School found that evaluators define merit in their own image. McKinsey and Leanan showed that women of color lose more than 75% of their representation between entry level and the C-suite. Columbia research shows workers from lower social class origins are 32% less likely to become managers than people who started with more privilege and more connections. Hagar's quiet firing wasn't quiet to her, and the quiet firing of competent employees isn't quiet to them either, because the pain is real even when the paperwork is invisible. The hurt is real either way. The desert of Beersheba. She wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba carrying only bread and a skin of water. The sun beat down on her head with no cloud and no shade to break the heat until the water ran out. She put the child under a bush. She sat down a bow shot away, saying she couldn't watch him die. Then she wept aloud, because the water vanished and the hope she carried from the first well ran dry. This was the lowest point in the story. A woman they used for her body and then threw away for her loyalty now watched her son die of thirst in the desert, and she had reached the end of every road she knew. Every system built by humans collapsed around her because Abraham failed her and Sarah failed her first. The well of Bir Lahai Roy felt like a distant memory. She found no strength left to run and no voice left to pray. She sat in the sand and waited for death. The well she named so long ago might as well have been on another planet. The story isn't over, though. God isn't finished with the people the world discards, because the silence of the desert is about to break wide open with a voice from heaven that redefines who gets to be seen. God hears the boy. God heard the boy's voice, and the angel called to Hagar from heaven, asked what was wrong, told her not to fear, and told her the Lord heard the boy's cry and his plight. Then God opened her eyes. She saw a well of water, filled the skin, and gave the boy to drink. This was the second time God saw her. Not because she performed better or earned another chance, but because God saw the forgotten. Psalm 139 tells us that the Lord searches us and knows us, and he perceives our thoughts from afar, even when we can't perceive them ourselves. When the workplace ignores you, God values your integrity, your unseen kindness, and the obedience no one applauds. A nation from the forgotten. God stayed with Ishmael as he grew up, and he became an expert bowman who lived in the wilderness of Paran while his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. God built a nation of him. The boy they left to die became the father of a nation that still bears his name. The cast-out son fathered a people. The overlooked slave became the only woman in Scripture who ever named God, And Hagar's legacy isn't measured by whose table she sat at, but by whose eyes saw her when no one else would. That's the metric that matters. This is what success looks like when God is your evaluator. It looks like integrity over title, character over corner office, peace over performance, and obedience over optics, because these are the currencies that outlast every corporate restructure and every performance review you'll ever sit through. The metrics that matter aren't on the company scoreboard. They're the ones God writes down. Your unseen kindness isn't wasted, your quiet obedience isn't ignored, and God sees exactly what the company forgets. The God who still sees. El Roy isn't a one-time name. It's who God is. Psalm 139 reminds us that the Lord searches us out and knows us completely. He knows when we sit and when we rise, and He catches our thoughts before we speak them. Before a word sits on our tongue, He knows it completely, and even the darkness isn't dark to Him. He sees what the performance review misses. When the system ignores you, remember this. God sees your integrity when your manager doesn't. He sees your patience when your coworkers test it, and He sees the work you do when no one is watching. He sees the pain you carry when you sit in your car and cry before you walk into the office. You're not invisible to the only evaluator who matters. That changes how you show up on Monday morning, because you're no longer working for a scoreboard that forgets your name the moment you stop producing. This is the first name in a series because other names of God speak directly into the struggle you face at work. The desert is real, but so is the well.